Welcome to the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grant Competition Informational Webinar. The contents of this webinar complement but do not replace the request for grant application guidelines, which are posted on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. Interested applicants should also carefully read the other resources on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage, including the draft Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines for Program Year 2021, especially Appendix B, and the PDF of the content of the grant application before deciding to submit an application. This webinar will provide information on the grant application, review, and award processes. We will provide a general overview of the required activities and services and other requirements for grantees. Finally, we will provide suggested resources and grant tips. Section 243 of the Federal Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, provides funds to be awarded through the Pennsylvania Department of Education, PDE, Bureau of Post-Secondary and Higher Education, Division of Adult Education, to provide integrated English literacy and civics education programming. The total federal funding available for awards to provide integrated English literacy and civics education programming through this competition is approximately $1.7 million. This amount is based on the estimated federal grant award for FY 2020 as established in the United States Department of Education state tables and is subject to change. Applicants may apply to serve any area of the state, but must demonstrate need for and interest in the proposed integrated English literacy and civics education program services in that area. As stated in WIOA, funds allocated under Section 243 are to be used for grants for integrated English literacy and civics education in combination with integrated education and training activities. Each program that receives funding under this application shall be designed to prepare adults who are English language learners for and place such adults in unsubsidized employment in in-demand industries and occupations that lead to economic self-sufficiency and integrate with the local workforce development system and its functions. This grant is not meant to provide ESL services for life skills. We need to stress that the purpose of this funding is to offer integrated English literacy and civics education activities in combination with integrated education and training activities. This means that all students must participate in the integrated English literacy and civics education activities. The Division of Adult Education is requiring that all students in a Section 243 funded program participate in one full session of integrated English literacy and civics education activities prior to participating in the integrated education and training activity. And that is in at least one full session. They may participate in more. Programs may not enroll students only in the integrated education and training activity. Federal regulations in 34 CFR paragraph 463.33 state the following regarding integrated English literacy and civics education services. They are education services provided to English language learners who are adults, including professionals with degrees or credentials in their native countries, that enable such adults to achieve competency in the English language and acquire the basic and more advanced skills needed to function effectively as parents, workers, and citizens in the United States. They must include instruction in literacy and English language acquisition and instruction on the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation, and may include workforce training. 34 CFR 463.73 restates the requirements from statute and paragraph 463.33 in describing the requirements for eligible providers that receive funding through the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program. Providers must provide services that include instruction in literacy and English language acquisition and instruction on the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation, and are designed to prepare adults who are English language learners for and place such adults in unsubsidized employment in in-demand industries and occupations that lead to economic self-sufficiency and integrate with the local workforce development system and its functions. Per 34 CFR paragraph 463.74, an eligible provider that receives funds through the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program may meet the requirements to use funds for integrated English literacy and civics education in combination with integrated education and training activities by co-enrolling participants in integrated education and training as described in subpart D of WIOA that is provided within the local or regional workforce development area from sources other than Section 243 of WIOA. Or using funds provided under Section 243 of the Act to support integrated education and training activities as described in this part. That is what is allowed under WIOA and related regulations. The Division of Adult Education has established stricter requirements. All Section 243 IELCE program grantees must provide at least one integrated education and training activity per year specifically and exclusively for the IELCE program participants. However, a Section 243 program participant may choose to participate in a different integrated education and training activity at the agency if the agency also provides a division-approved integrated education and training activity under their adult basic education grant or with braided funding. An eligible participant is defined by WIOA as an individual who has attained 16 years of age, is not enrolled or required to be enrolled in secondary school under state law, and who is basic skills deficient, does not have a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent, and has not achieved an equivalent level of education, or is an English language learner. WIOA regulations state that individuals who meet these criteria, including English language learners who are professionals with degrees and credentials obtained in their native countries, may receive services under Section 243. Among the eligible participants, PDE believes that participants who are interested in instruction in the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, who have a post-secondary or employment goal, and who enter the Section 243 program at one of the 6 National Reporting System ESL educational functioning levels, as determined by an approved official assessment, may benefit most from the services under Section 243. This includes participants who post-test at exit criteria for ESL and are then assessed at ABE, ASE levels while participating in the Section 243 program. When recruiting students for the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program, agencies need to clearly and fully explain all aspects of the program to ensure that students who enroll in the IELCE program truly understand what they are participating in. There are likely individuals who are eligible participants, but for whom the IELCE program is not appropriate. Prospective students need to have enough information about the program to make that decision. As defined in WIOA, an eligible provider, which we are calling an eligible applicant, is an organization that has demonstrated effectiveness in providing adult education and literacy activities. They may include any of the entities listed on this slide and a consortium or coalition of the agencies, organizations, institutions, libraries, or authorities described, a partnership between an employer and an entity described, and any other organizations not listed. For the purposes of the competition in Pennsylvania, a consortium or coalition of agencies will be defined as a main grantee with one or more sub-grantees. The main grantee will serve as both the fiscal agent for the grant and as a provider of some of the services proposed in the grant application. The main grantee is responsible for ensuring that all activities provided are completed as proposed and is responsible for monitoring and compliance of the subgrantees. Applicants cannot subcontract with another applicant for a portion of the proposed services. Agencies can only be a main grantee or a subgrantee. Answers in the narrative and agency information sections of the grant application should reflect the work of the consortium or coalition as a whole rather than treat each entity separately. As indicated on the first eligible applicants slide, eligible providers under Title II of WIOA are organizations with demonstrated effectiveness in providing adult education and literacy activities. For the purposes of establishing demonstrated effectiveness to qualify as an eligible provider for Section 243 funding, an applicant must provide performance data on its record of improving the skills of eligible individuals, particularly eligible individuals who have low levels of literacy, and information regarding its outcomes for participants related to employment, attainment of a secondary school diploma or its equivalent, and transition to post-secondary education and training. An applicant that has been previously funded under Title II of WIOA must submit performance data required under Section 116 of WIOA as represented by performance under the National Reporting System. An applicant that has not been previously funded under Title II of WIOA must provide performance data to demonstrate its past effectiveness. Each individual agency in a consortium or coalition of agencies must be an eligible provider by itself. In other words, each agency within a consortium or coalition must be an organization that has demonstrated effectiveness in providing adult education and literacy activities. Each agency in the consortium or coalition must individually provide all of the data required to establish demonstrated effectiveness. If one agency within a consortium or coalition is not an agency of demonstrated effectiveness and is therefore not an eligible provider, the entire consortium is considered not eligible provider. PDE will require applicants for Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grants to provide quantitative data for the immediate preceding 2 program years. The data provided by the applicant to establish demonstrated effectiveness must include the following: the number of individuals in the outcome cohort, in other words, the denominator, the number of individuals who achieved the outcomes, i.e. the numerator, and the resulting percentage of individuals who achieved the outcome. The tables that applicants will use to provide data for the purposes of establishing demonstrated effectiveness to qualify as an eligible provider are on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. Applicants must download and complete the appropriate table and then upload the completed document into the Demonstrated Effectiveness to Determine Eligibility section in the grant application in eGrants. In the in the case of a consortium or coalition of agencies, each agency must complete a table on its own, and each table must be uploaded separately. PDE has established the following thresholds for an applicant to be determined to be an eligible provider for the purposes of this Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education 061 grant competition. A total number of individuals in ESL levels greater than 30 in each of the 2 years. A denominator greater than 5 for each of the following outcomes: attain a high school diploma or its equivalent, transition to employment, and transition to post-secondary education or training in each of the 2 years. The overall percentage of individuals in the 6 ESL levels combined who improved English language proficiency must be greater than 30% in each of the 2 years. Prior to reviewing and scoring submitted applications, PDE will review the information provided by each applicant, including each agency in a consortium or coalition of agencies, to establish demonstrated effectiveness to determine if the applicant is an eligible provider. Only applications that are determined to be from eligible providers will be reviewed, scored, and considered for funding. In the case of a consortium or coalition of agencies, all agencies in the consortium or coalition must be determined to be eligible providers. Applicants that are not able to establish demonstrated effectiveness under the criteria earlier described are not eligible providers, and their applications will not be reviewed, scored, and considered for funding. Any applicants that are determined not to be eligible providers will be notified of that decision. PDE reserves the right to require successful applicants to demonstrate documentation in support of the information provided to establish demonstrated effectiveness. Requirements for Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Programs are covered in more detail in the Draft Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines, Program Year 2020-21, Appendix B. The guidelines are posted on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. Successful applicants for Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program 061 grant funds will demonstrate the capacity to provide all activities required under Section 243. Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education programs funded under Section 243 must have the following requirements established by PDE. Year-round leveled, managed enrollment, integrated English literacy and civics education classroom activities and support services, including during the summer. Integrated English literacy and civics education activities must support integrated English literacy and civics education program participants to prepare for and transition successfully to the integrated education and training activity, and to earn a high school equivalency credential if needed as part of the training activity. As defined in WIOA, integrated English literacy and civics education activities include all of the 3 components in combination: English language acquisition activities, literacy activities, and civics education, which is instruction in the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation. At least one integrated education and training activity, which must be held a minimum of once per program year. All students who enroll in the integrated education and training activity must have completed at least one session of integrated English literacy and civics education activities before enrolling in the integrated education and training activity. Programs must have agency-specific performance targets established through negotiation with the Division of Adult Education, which programs meet in each year of the grant cycle. Please note that successful applicants that have received funding under Section 243 of WIOA in the 2018-19 to 2020 grant cycle, and that as of July 1st, 2020, have unresolved findings or an outstanding corrective action plan from the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program monitoring visit during 2019-20 must meet or exceed all of the agency-specific targets negotiated with the Division of Adult Education during the first year of the grant. Failure to do so will result in termination of the grant for cause. Finally, all programs must have a plan for ensuring student access to grant activities, including participation in the integrated education and training activity. Further requirements include that grantees must also provide support services to help students address barriers to participation, support services to help students identify education and career goals, develop employability skills, and successfully participate in and complete post-secondary education training and gain employment, also called transition support services. Integration of workforce preparation activities into instruction and support services. A program administrator who is a full-time employee of the grantee agency. If the program administrator is not working 100% on the division-funded activities, the agency must provide evidence that this individual has sufficient time allocated to these activities to meet all of the requirements of the program administrator position. The program administrator does not have to be paid from grant funds. However, the person must have sufficient time allocated to the activities supported by this grant. Grantees must have a partnership at a local PA CareerLink site and fulfill all of the roles and responsibilities of a one-stop partner, including entering into a memorandum of understanding with the local board, contributing to infrastructure costs of the PA CareerLink site, providing access to grant services through the PA CareerLink site, and providing career services to eligible one-stop participants. Grantees must integrate with the local workforce development system and its functions to place participants in the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program in unsubsidized employment in in-demand industries and occupations that lead to economic self-sufficiency. Finally, programs must have a signed partnership agreement with a training provider to deliver the training portion of the integrated education and training activity. As defined in federal statute and regulations, IELCE services must include instruction in English literacy, English language acquisition, and the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation. In addition, PDE has established the following state-specific requirements for IELCE activities under a Section 243 IELCE program. The program must offer at least 2 levels of IELCE activity classes year-round. In the context of the Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program, leveled classes means that classes include students in no more than 2 NRS levels per class. Programs may serve beginning ESL level students as part of the Section 243 IELCE activities, or may elect to serve them with other funds. In any case, there must be a path into the Section 243 IELCE program for beginning level students. The 3 components of an IELCE activity must be integrated and delivered concurrently and contextually. To determine readiness for the integrated education and training activity, multiple skill areas should be assessed. So, to support successful transition to and completion of the integrated education and training activity, programs should assess IELCE students' speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills prior to enrolling students in the integrated education and training activity. Programs may use a combination of standardized formal and informal assessments for this purpose. Agencies must have a Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education program-specific attendance policy that supports the development of self-management skills necessary to succeed in the integrated education training activity and employment. To ensure that the IELCE activities include instruction in the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation, PDE requires programs to use the IELCE Civics Content Guide for curriculum development and lesson planning. The civics content of the IELCE activity must fall under one or more of the prescribed topic areas. The integrated education and training activity proposed by the applicant must meet federal regulations for the activity and additional requirements imposed by the Division of Adult Education. Per federal regulations, the term integrated education and training refers to a service approach that provides adult education and literacy activities concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. Per regulations, to meet the requirement that the three components be integrated, services must be provided concurrently and contextually such that within the overall scope of a particular integrated education and training program, the adult education and literacy activities, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training are each of sufficient intensity and quality and based on the most rigorous research available, particularly with respect to improving reading, writing, mathematics, and English proficiency of eligible individuals. It must occur simultaneously and must use occupationally relevant instructional materials. The integrated education and training program must have a single set of learning objectives that identifies specific adult education content, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training competencies, and the program activities are organized to function cooperatively. A provider meets the requirement that the integrated education and training program provided for the purpose of educational and career advancement if the adult education component of the program is aligned with the state's content standards for adult education, which in Pennsylvania is the College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education, CCRS for short, and the integrated education and training program is part of a career pathway. To ensure that the IET is part of a career pathway, the occupational training focus should be aligned with local workforce needs. As stated previously, all IELCE programs must provide at least one integrated education and training activity per year, specifically and exclusively for IELCE program participants. In the context of the integrated education and training activity, integrated means that the adult education and literacy activities, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training are delivered concurrently and contextually, have a single set of learning objectives that identifies specific content and competencies, and the components function cooperatively. This means that not only do the adult education and literacy activities support the ability of participants to succeed in the training, but that the occupational training must also formally and transparently reinforce the learning happening in adult education and workforce preparation components. Successful applicants must get the integrated education and training activity approved by the division before they can start the classes in the integrated education and training activity. Please note that all integrated education and training activities that will be offered under Section 243 grants awarded through this competition must be approved by the division before they are offered, including any that have been previously approved by the division. Programs must use the Integrated Education and Training proposal to submit the plan for the Integrated Education and Training activity. Final approval of the Integrated Education and Training activity will require a signed MOU or other contract with the occupational training provider. The MOU or contract must specify the roles and activities that each party will fulfill and must include a budget for any grant funds to be paid to the training provider. All successful applicants under this request for grant application guidelines that also received funding under the Section 243 of WIOA in 2018-2020 grant cycle must have a fully approved plan for the Integrated Education and Training activity by September 1st, 2020. Failure to have an approved plan for the Integrated Education and Training activity by that deadline will result in suspension of payments until an approved plan is in place. Those applicants must also hold at least one Integrated Education and Training activity by the end of the first program year, or they will be determined not to have met the contract obligations and the grant agreement will be terminated for cause. Successful applicants that have not received prior funding under Section 243 must have a full plan for the Integrated Education and Training activity submitted to and approved by the division no later than January 1st, 2021. Failure to have an approved plan for the Integrated Education and Training activity by the deadline will result in suspension of payments until an approved plan is in place. Successful applicants who have not received prior funding under Section 243 that do not have an approved plan in place by the end of the first program year will be placed on probation for the second year of the grant cycle and will not receive second-year funds until a plan is in place. Continued failure will result in termination of the grant agreement for cause. In a previous slide, we provided the federal regulations regarding how a program meets the requirement that the three components of an integrated education and training will be integrated. Specifically, the adult education and literacy activities, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training are research-based and each of sufficient intensity and quality, particularly with respect to improving reading, writing, mathematics, and English proficiency of eligible individuals, occur simultaneously and use occupationally relevant instructional materials, and the IET activity must have a single set of learning objectives that identifies specific adult education content, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training competencies, and the program activities are organized to function cooperatively. We want to stress the importance of that last part. In order to be an integrated education and training activity, there must be a single set of learning objectives, and the activities in the IET must function cooperatively. Therefore, the instruction in the occupational training portion of an IET must clearly and transparently scaffold and reinforce the content being learned in the adult education component and promote the employability skills developed during the workforce preparation activities. This means that the curriculum for the occupational training will need to be adapted to incorporate teaching strategies, activities, and assignments that support integration. In other words, the occupational training as provided within an IET will be different than the standalone version of that training. If the occupational training does not clearly and transparently reinforce learning in the other components, then it is not an IET. Rather, students are co-enrolled in adult education and occupational training, which does not meet the requirement for an IET as part of the IELCE grant. Therefore, occupational training that is strictly regulated and that has curriculum and content that cannot be altered is likely not appropriate for an IET. Another aspect of the federal regulations around integrated education and training that we want to emphasize is the idea of sufficient intensity of instruction to improve reading, writing, mathematics, and English proficiency of the participants. The purpose of an IET activity is to accelerate learning in all components so that the participants can acquire academic, employability, and occupational skills simultaneously. Therefore, the adult education component should not simply focus on introducing vocabulary that will be used in the training. It must cover the skills the students need to actively and successfully participate in all aspects of the occupational training, to successfully pass any tests associated with the occupational training, and to be successfully employed in the related field. Students should also be able to transfer the skills learned to other contexts. So, when planning the IET activity, you must consider the needs of your students and the academic skills they need to learn all of the material covered in the training and to successfully apply it. Think about how many hours of adult education will be necessary to provide instruction of sufficient intensity. The Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines require funded programs to schedule classes a minimum of 5 hours per week. However, that is just a minimum, and it applies to all types of programming funded by the division. Greater intensity of instruction is allowable, and in most integrated education and training activities, likely preferable. Please note that within an IET, all three components must be offered for the full length of the IET. However, the intensity of instruction and the number of hours per week for each component may vary during that period. From this description of the requirements of an integrated education and training activity, it is clear that ongoing joint planning is essential for a high-quality, compliant, effective integrated education and training activity. You should plan and budget for considerable planning time for your staff and for the training provider. Significant joint planning time is needed up front when you are designing your IET and working with your training provider to develop the single set of learning objectives and the IET curriculum. Joint planning continues while the IET is being held so that the training instructor and adult education instructor can be responsive to each other and student needs. All instructors must have lesson plans, and those lesson plans should be designed and adapted cooperatively by the adult education and training instructors. When planning for and writing the Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grant application, applicants should use the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Checklist, the Integrated Education and Training Checklist, and the Integrated Education and Training Proposal to guide their grant applications. The documents are posted on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. Successful applicants will be required to submit the completed Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Checklist and the completed Integrated Education and Training Checklist as part of the grant approval process. No grant will be approved until the applicant has submitted documentation that meets division approval. In awarding funds, PDE will prioritize funding through the review and rating process to grant applications from eligible providers with past effectiveness in high-quality services that improve the skills of eligible participants and help those participants to earn a high school equivalency credential, gain and retain employment, and transition to post-secondary education or training. PDE will prioritize funding for those applications that demonstrate a thorough and detailed plan for a Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program aligned with local needs that meets all of the minimum requirements and provides evidence of the applicant's organizational capacity to meet all of the programmatic, reporting, administrative, and fiscal requirements of the grant. High-quality instruction that is based on best practices and the college and career readiness standards for adult education and is of sufficient intensity to lead to student outcomes. services that align with the strategies and goals of the local workforce area as defined in the local plan and with the activities and services of the PA CareerLink site partners. High-quality student support services that help students to persist and succeed in adult basic education services and meet their personal, educational, and career goals. An excellent description of need, including evidence of a sufficient number of individuals with the interest in and ability to complete the offered occupational training with the support of the integrated education and training activity at some point during the grant cycle. An explanation of how the need was determined and how the applicant determined that the integrated English literacy and civics education program is the best way to address this need. A detailed description of planning, including working with local workforce partners and social service agencies serving the target population, and proposed targets for enrollment in the integrated English literacy and civics education program, enrollment in the integrated education and training activity, completion of the integrated education and training activity, including attaining any related credential necessary for employment, educational functioning level gain based on pre-post testing, attainment of employment in an occupation directly related to the occupational training, attainment of a high school equivalency credential that are ambitious and align with the funding requested. Higher costs per student will require higher targets. In addition to the reporting required of all division-funded programs, the Division of Adult Education has additional reporting requirements for Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grantees. At the end of each program year, Section 243 grantees will submit a final report to the Division that contains optional outcome measures for civics education programs and quantitative and qualitative data related to learner outcomes. Grantees must meet the agency-specific targets that were established during the grant award approval process and must provide quarterly reports to their advisors on progress. Grantees must have a system for tracking and reporting completion of occupational training and attainment of related credentials. Applicants must demonstrate that they have the required staffing and that the staff members of the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program are well trained and meet the minimum requirements established by PDE. Refer to Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines Section 204 for details. Program administrators, coordinators, instructional staff, and student support staff must have at least a bachelor's degree. All programs are required to have a data quality specialist. The data quality specialist is not simply a clerical position doing data entry. This person is responsible for the accuracy and quality of the data reported to the Division of Adult Education. As a result, the Division has established minimum requirements for this role. The person serving as the data quality specialist must have a bachelor's degree or a post-secondary credential in data management. Any additional data entry staff who are overseen by the data quality specialist may be clerical staff. The Division recommends that programs have additional data entry staff if possible. Programs are required to enter all data within 14 days of the data being collected once eData is open for the year. The training provider for the training portion of the IET must also be properly qualified. The adult education teacher is likely not the qualified trainer. Programs should apply for those funds necessary to meet the grant requirements. Provide the proposed services to the number of students they can serve based on need and interest in the service area, and meet the proposed targets. This can include the costs associated with the development and implementation of the integrated education and training activity. PDE requires programs to provide a 25% match, and applicants should consider that requirement when determining funding requests. PDE reserves the right to adjust the actual grant award amount of successful applicants during the grant contract approval process to be appropriate for the proposed activities. Applicants are strongly encouraged to cover the costs of the occupational training with other funding sources available to the program or to the students. However, the costs of providing the occupational training portion of the IET may be paid for from the grant if necessary. Please note that programs may not use grant funds to pay tuition costs for the students. Programs may only use grant funds to cover the cost of occupational training. Tuition includes costs above and beyond the cost of the training. The cost of providing an integrated English literacy and civics education program may be higher than the cost of other types of adult education programs. Applicants may need to cover training costs or a portion of them, which will increase the cost per student. Applicants should factor this into their budgets while ensuring that the costs they include are reasonable and necessary for the services proposed. Additionally, if an applicant is proposing a lower number of IET participants, their overall cost per student should be lower. Grant applications will be submitted through PDE's eGrants system. Section 3 of the RGA provides details on obtaining access to the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grant application in eGrants. In the meantime, to allow applicants to review the content of the grant application, we have posted a PDF of the grant content to the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. Please note that the grant content document is for reference only, as the application will be submitted through eGrants. The eGrants system homepage has several user guides. In addition, we will post some tips to the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. The Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grant applications will open on Monday, March 16th, 2020. The grant application deadline is April 15th, 2020 at 12 p.m. noon. At that point, the eGrants system will close the grant. In order to complete the grant, all sections must be marked complete. Once all sections are marked complete, the applicant will click the Complete Step button. The eGrants system records the exact time that the applicant clicks the button. Once the grant has been successfully completed, the status will be submitted for peer review. After the grant deadline, grants will be reviewed and scored. All Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program 061 grant applications will be reviewed except those disqualified for one or more of the following reasons. The entity submitting the application does not meet the definition of eligible applicants. The application is incomplete, or applications not completed by the application deadline. Completion will be determined by the time the eGrants system records that the program completed the application by marking all sections complete and clicking the Complete button. Review teams of at least 3 people will review the grant applications using a scoring rubric. A summary of the scoring is in Appendix A of the Request for Grant Application Guidelines. All 3 sections of the grant application, the narrative, the applicant information section, and the budgets will be reviewed and scored. In addition, local workforce boards will review the applications to provide services in the local area for consistency with the local plan. The Division of Adult Education will provide the appropriate applications and review tools to each of the local boards after grants are submitted to the division via eGrants. Applicants should not give their applications to the local boards directly for review. Again, applicants should not give their applications to the local boards directly for review. PDE will take the results of the review by local boards and any related recommendations to improve alignment into consideration when making grant awards. Once the applications have been reviewed and scored, they will be ranked from highest to lowest scoring. Applications will be funded from highest scoring to lowest scoring based on the following criteria: a minimum score of 170 and availability of funds. Applications with a score of less than 170 will not be funded regardless of availability of funds. The Division of Adult Education will notify each applicant of the outcome of the review process and whether its application will be funded. Applications that are selected for award as a result of the application review and scoring process may require revisions or submission of additional information during the contract review and approval process. Successful grant applications will be approved for a 3-year grant cycle. Grant funds for the second and third years will be awarded through a notification of funding contingent on the availability of funds. Each year's renewal option, grant conditions, and grant amounts will be based on the following criteria: contract compliance, including success in meeting contracted enrollment and providing the contracted services; evidence of sufficient progress in meeting the targets proposed in the grant application and finalized through negotiation with PDE; evidence of continuous program improvement; compliance with fiscal and programmatic policies and guidelines; and the amount of the appropriation. Programs that fail to sufficiently address the above criteria or any additional conditions imposed on individual grants may be terminated prior to the end of the grant cycle. The Division of Adult Education has provided many resources to applicants. Links to the resources are on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage, which can be accessed by going to PDE's website at www.education.pa.gov. Select Instruction, then Adult Basic Education to get to the Division's homepage. From the homepage, click on Grant Competitions. Applicants should review the resources both before and during the grant writing process. The resources include the request for grant application guidelines, the Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines draft for 2020-21, and relevant division policies. We also provide links to the Pennsylvania WIOA Combined State Plan and the regional and local workforce plans. We do not have links to the MOUs for the local PA career links in the local areas. We recommend that applicants check the local boards' websites or contact the local boards for copies of the MOU. We strongly recommend that all agencies that are considering applying for an Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grant carefully read the Request for Grant Application Guidelines, the Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines for Program Year 2020-21, especially Appendix B, and the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program grant content before starting the grant application. For all applicants, these documents will give you a good idea of what is expected of grantees. For currently funded programs, there are some significant changes and new requirements to consider. Once you begin working on the grants in eGrants, be sure to read all of the help buttons. They are blue circles with a question mark in them next to the question. The help buttons provide the maximum characters allowable for the answer and list information that must be addressed in the answer. Note that the maximum in characters include spaces and punctuation. When composing the responses for each item in the grant application, make sure the answers address the information that is being requested. Avoid including information that is not relevant to the item. For example, if a question asks you to describe how the program will do something, do not describe what the program has done in the past. You are proposing future activities. Make sure the responses are clear and concise, and do not assume that the reviewers know your program. Reviewers should not have to search the answer for the necessary information or try to interpret agency-specific terminology. Unfortunately, the eGrant system does not allow for any formatting, bulleted or numbered lists, or paragraphs. The system also has problems recognizing special characters. Some applicants write the content of their grant application in a Word or Pages document and then copy and paste the information into eGrants. If you choose to do this, make sure the text is plain text without any formatting before copying and pasting. This will prevent issues such as apostrophes showing up as question marks and other format conversion issues. Save often. At the bottom of each section is a Save and Continue button, which allows you to save the information that has been entered and keeps you on the same page. The Save button will save the information and take you back to the grant application detail page. There is an item in the grant application called Past Effectiveness. This section is an opportunity for the applicant to describe their past effectiveness in providing the services of this grant. Make sure to include information that clearly establishes past effectiveness with English language learners related to all of the listed outcomes. Information may be qualitative and quantitative. In the case of a consortium or coalition of agencies, the answer must address the past effectiveness of each agency separately. There is a section in the narrative called Alignment with the Workforce, with 6 questions relating proposed activities to the local workforce plan. The 6 questions are listed 3 times. This is to allow applicants who wish to provide services in multiple local workforce areas to address each area individually. So all applicants must complete the 6 questions for Workforce Area 1. Only applicants applying to serve additional local areas have to complete the questions under Workforce Areas Sections 2 and 3. The maximum total score in the Alignment with Workforce section is 12 points, regardless of how many workforce areas are addressed. Scores for multiple areas will be averaged to get the total score. The information in the agency activity summary should reflect the activities that the agency actually proposes to provide. The number of IET participants is a subset of the total planned enrollment. You must enter an overall requested amount and an IET requested amount. Based on these figures, the table will calculate your proposed cost per student for each activity separately. Double-check these numbers for reasonableness to make sure you have entered your requested amounts carefully. Before completing the budgets, review sections 600 to 609 of the Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines. This covers allowable uses of funds, how to allocate allowable costs to the budget, and other fiscal requirements. Please note that in some cases, the Division of Adult Education uses the function and object codes differently than the Division of Federal Programs. Applicants must refer to our guidelines when completing the budgets. This grant requires a 25% local match. The guidelines provide information on how to correctly calculate your required local match and related requirements. WIOA has specific requirements regarding administrative costs of federally funded adult basic education funding. The Division of Adult Education uses function codes 2300 for these administrative costs. Under WIOA, administrative costs are capped at 5% of the grant amount. The following costs are considered administrative costs, which means they must be charged to function code 2300. Planning costs, including the costs associated with planning and coordination with workforce system partners. The PA CareerLink infrastructure costs paid from the grant, and costs of contracted professional development. The cost of contracted professional development refers to funds paid to the larger agency to cover the cost of mandated agency professional development or training, and the fees paid to outside professional development providers. It does not refer to adult education staff time participating in professional development activities. It also does not refer to the work of the in-house professional development specialist and program administrators and coordinators supporting and leading staff professional development activities. Any restricted indirect costs charged to the grant are also considered administrative costs and are included in the 5% cap. WIOA allows the division to agree to, through negotiations with the local program, a higher amount when the 5% cap is too restrictive to allow for adequate planning and administration. Applicants that believe that they have a strong case for a waiver to the 5% cap should budget the expected administrative costs. The division will consider the request when successful applications are being processed. Please note that priority for waivers will be given to allow successful applicants to meet the requirements to contribute to PA CareerLink infrastructure costs. Please refer to the Adult Education and Family Literacy Guidelines for 2021 for more information on how we handle negotiations for the federal 5% cap. All Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grant Program awardees will be required to attend the IELCE kickoff on Wednesday, July 8th, 2020 at the Patan in Harrisburg. More information will be provided to successful applicants after grant awards are announced. This concludes the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program Grant Application webinar. If you have questions at any time during the application process, submit them to ra-able@pa.gov. Emails should include Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program 061 in the subject line. Division of Adult Education staff will periodically post responses to the submitted questions on the Division of Adult Education Grant Application webpage for all applicants to review. Do not send questions directly to Division staff. Thank you.